Ah,
All right, welcome everybody to Cycle Jerks Podcast. We're on episode 153, and today we're very excited. I should also mention, joined as always by my co-host Dave Dalton. Dave, how are you?
Good today, actually. Thank you. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
I know he's
Good
been saying
weekend of
good.
riding.
I don't buy it, but he says good, but I don't buy it. Today, this is a cool one. We're joined by a fellow I met at Sea Otter this year, and he's co-hosts a couple podcasts. You probably, if you're into mountain biking or super aero nerdy bike stuff, maybe you know this guy already, but he's the co-host of a couple of different podcasts. The Leadville Trail 100 podcast. He co-hosts that with somebody named Fatty.
yeah.
Yeah. And then he also co-hosts the Marginal Gains podcast,
Right.
which is all about wind tunnels, aero socks, and all the super esoteric stuff that we
Mhm.
all nerd out on. So Michael Hotten
Mhm.
goes by Hottie.
Mhm.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you guys. Thanks for having me. It's good to reach out to the Bay Area, where I'm from originally. Well, I was raised in the Bay Area, so always good to touch bases with anybody in the Bay Area while I sit down here in Los Angeles.
Yeah, nice. So
We're in
where
the Bay Area.
My folks moved to California in 1969 from Seattle, and we originally set down in Menlo Park. And then we moved to
Okay.
the East Bay to the little cow town of Moraga, home of St. Mary's College.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's probably where I really started riding bikes with the kids and stuff. I got my first, geared bike there. And so I grew up in Moraga and spent some time at Berkeley. My sister lives in North Berkeley. Spent a little time in San Bruno. So lived around a little bit there. Sacramento.
Yeah.
Did you
Well,
just keep getting evicted, or do you like?
No, eventually after tooling around and kind of failing as a student and not being a very good student and not going to college, I somehow stumbled my way into broadcasting, into radio. I made a radio career out of basically nothing. And ended up with my first job in South Lake Tahoe. Great place to get a first on-air job.
oh
After
man.
I spent about a year in San Francisco working just kind of behind the scenes as a news editor. And then I got my first on-air news guy job in South Lake Tahoe, which was terrific. That was a great place to learn about like news because they have just so much going on there. You got the environment, you got multi-layers of government, right? You got this beautiful lake and tourism and just everything is right there to learn and to absorb right away. And then from
Yeah.
there, I went to Sacramento and then down to Los Angeles. So,
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. You bounced around a little bit.
mhm.
Yeah. You like LA?
Do I like LA? I've never called this home. Let's put it that way. But
Okay.
Los Angeles for a bicycle rider is got to be a top spot in the country if you want to ride all the time.
Yeah.
Like if it rains here, our rain jacket is tomorrow. That's what I always say. Tomorrow is your rain jacket because all you do is wait out the rain and tomorrow is going to be fine. You
Yeah.
can you can ride your bike 12 months out of the year here and be at the worst in maybe arm warmers and a vest, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's kind of the life down here. So for bike riding and my kind of development as a cyclist and as a racer really happened here. The racing and the competition down here is quite fast. We don't have the level of road racing and the number of road races you'll find up in Northern California, but there are a lot of criteriums here and a lot of fast people down here. So I
Yeah.
learned how to get fast and ride in a pack quickly by sticking my nose and getting involved in a club and then started racing.
Yeah. Yeah. I did a little bit of beyond listening to the podcasts. I was looking at one of your bios here, and you actually covered like some serious media and
Hmm.
like this Somalia's humanitarian crisis and
Hmm. Hmm.
Princess Di and all kinds of OJ Simpson, and
Yep.
it said you even witnessed an execution.
Yeah, I did. Robert Alton Harris at San Quentin. Yeah, that I don't know that my brain ever got over that event. It was, pretty dramatic stuff. An
Yeah.
odd thing to really volunteer for too. Now that I look back at it, like, you had to volunteer to be a media witness. And so
Oh,
you put your name in the hat and they drew names and my name came up and there I was. at San Quentin, witnessing California's first execution post. Right, the Supreme Court, for a while, executions were outlawed in the 70s and 80s, and then the Supreme Court overturned that, and a lot of executions continued to take place. And so Robert Alton Harris was the first, once the death penalty was again being carried out in California. So that was, and it was a gas execution too. Now they do lethal injection. Up until recently, it was lethal injection. So,
Wow. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
That's a wild one.
It's a weird way to become somebody involved in cycling and kind of cycling journalism and a podcast, you know. But it all, I mean, it does. It all comes back, like everything I learned in media about planning and, you know, mapping out a show or getting ready for stuff or gathering audio or working with audio. I mean, that all comes rushing back in podcasting. Like, I just take those skills that I learned over 30 plus years and put them into play. The 3 or 4 times a month we do a show.
Yeah.
So some of the other stuff that you talked about, Somalia and Lady Di, I mean, were you on the ground, like you had a go bag and Lady Di, you hear about this crash or you get on a plane and you go and you're covering it? Is it, or
so they were both, they were both kind of different things. Here's, first of all, for the journalism students out there, here's your lesson. Always have an updated passport. Always, always, always have your passport updated. When Princess Diana was killed in Paris, my news director wanted someone else to go to Paris to cover that half of the story. But that reporter did not have her passport updated. So then they turned to me. I got the call like, Michael, is your passport up to date? I went, yeah, of course it's up to date. They're like, okay, can you pack your bag for Paris? Because we need you to go because so-and-so's passport isn't up to date. So that's how I got to go and cover that very huge. That was a big, big story, right, to be on. So Somalia was different. That was a plane ride actually with the Air Force Reserves. They had reached out to local media in Los Angeles back when George Bush, the first George Bush, decided to help, you know, with the humanitarian crisis in Somalia and started sending troops over there to kind of, you know, open the floodgates to get food out to the inner part of Somalia, because of course the warlords were locking down that country and controlling everything. And so when they started moving troops to Somalia, the Air Force reached out to some of the local media and said, hey, would you like to go? I mean, we can put you on a KC-10 and fly you over there and you'll have an escort with you, which was great. I mean, you have a military officer with you in the Air Force. That means you get to jump on airplanes. Like you get on, you know, fly to Kenya and then you get on a plane, you fly, you know, in country to Somalia and see stuff. And it was wonderful. It wasn't a long trip. It was about a week. You know, I wasn't in country there for a long time. I know people had spent much longer there. And I actually left like 2 days after I left, the Black Hawk Down thing happened. So I wasn't there for that huge crisis, but I saw enough, you know, suffering for a lifetime there. It was just unreal what I witnessed there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess it makes perfect sense with all that in your past, right? The execution, the suffering in Kenya. It makes sense that now you just play around with bicycles.
Well, you know, I'll say this.
Transition to golf first, though.
Yeah, I did. You're right.
Yeah.
Golf was something I was doing while I was in broadcast news. I was a heavy golfer. Really played a lot. Practice. I mean, I replaced golf with cycling. It was like the same thing. But when I was a golfer, I practiced every day. I studied the game. I even had a golf talk show on the side.
Oh,
so
wow.
This is before podcasting. So essentially same thing. Now I'm a cyclist and a podcaster. Back then I was a broadcaster and a golfer. And I had a little side golf show too that me and a partner did. But anyhow, yeah, I was a serious golfer, played a lot of the big courses, Pebble Beach, St. Andrews, and got pretty darn good. I wasn't competitive. I'm actually a more competitive cyclist, or have been, than I was a golfer, but I was a very good golfer. I took a lot of pride in. My whole goal with golf was I want to be able to roll out of bed and break 80. Like I wanted that to be my thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I did. I was able to just get up and pretty much, not at the hardest courses, but at most courses, walk onto the course, figure it out, break 80. And that was kind of my deal there. So yeah, love golf and still love the game. But what wore on me with golf, and the reason I turned to cycling, was
Okay,
the
that was where I
waiting.
was going.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's the waiting. The problem started having with golf was the waiting. Like you have to get on the phone and wait to get a tee time. And then you get to the golf course and you have to wait to go off and play. Then you're on the golf course and what are you doing? You're waiting for your partner or the people in front of you all the time. It's
Yeah.
waiting, it's waiting, it's waiting for, right, 30 seconds of action. And that started to wear on me after a while. And I thought, I need something that's a little more active where I can take control and be active and do something immediately and not be impeded by other people. So I just traded one time consuming activity for another. I went from golf to cycling. It was pretty drastic too. I almost completely put the golf clubs aside and went right for bikes in a matter of a few months. So, and I've
Wow.
not
So,
played much golf since before uh, since around 2000.
okay, but there's a lot of sports out there. Well, first of all, let me just say the waiting thing would drive me batshit too. I can't even wait. Like Mike at High Tech Burrito when I met you up there the other night.
Yeah.
There's no fucking way I would have waited. I would have called, had my order ready, walked in, picked up my order, and gone. I can't stand in line in order.
Mhm.
It just like waiting is, I don't know. But anyways, I digress. There's a lot. You're playing golf. You're playing golf. There's a lot of sports to choose from. Why the bike?
I think a lot of people, I saw the Tour de France and I went, well, that looks interesting. Look at
Okay.
those people. They're suffering. I was never afraid of hard work and being put into uncomfortable situations, whether it be, mentally at work or physically. I like to lift weights and do other things in addition to golf. I didn't mind, the hard work it took to become a good golfer. And that it looked like to me something like, oh yeah, it looks like these folks work very hard at what they're trying to accomplish, and then they go out and kind of execute something. And golf is kind of the same way, right? And it's
Yeah.
also niche. Like I love baseball, which deep down is a niche sport. Like if you don't know baseball and you walk to a baseball game, you're probably going to be a little confused. It takes
Mhm.
some figuring out, or somebody has to teach you the game, right? Golf is kind of the same way, kind of a niche sport, doesn't really explain itself too well. And cycling certainly is, right? If you watch a road race, you don't know anything about road racing, you're going to go, well, why are all those guys riding together? And why are those three guys out in front? And why doesn't the leader just
Yeah.
take off and ride ahead? Right? There's all
Yeah.
this nuance to cycling that I just love. I mean, I love the nuance. I love the gray area. And cycling,
yeah.
especially road cycling, really has those gray areas and those what if that person did that type of thing and scenarios that develop. And that's what I loved about it. And that's why I picked it. That and the fact that the immediacy, like I could get on my bike, I could go. I could just go up, take off and go. Originally, I was a mountain biker, actually. And that actually got to me a little bit too. I got a little frustrated with it because originally as a mountain biker, I was like, okay, you put your bike in the car, you drive it to the trailhead, you put your pack on, you put your camelback on, and you ride. I was like, well, that's an awful lot to do just to start riding your bike. Then I got a road bike. Then I joined a
Yeah.
club. I went, boom, this is it. This is the
Yeah.
shit
Yeah,
now,
the
right?
instant
Now I
gratification.
ride to meet the group, we're off and running. So that's
So
what,
I'm going to ask you this, yeah, you don't have to answer, but your age and then how long, because you've done a lot. So how long when did you start? How long ago did you start? And how long you've been at cycling?
well, I just turned 60. I mean, I've been riding since, everyone says, oh, I started riding as a kid. And I did. I had a multi-speed, I had a 10-speed bike. I didn't
Yeah.
compete as a kid. I had a BMX bike when the BMX rage was going on. I had one of those. Frankly, I wasn't very good at it. I don't have a lot of great, jumping type skills or, if you saw me on a piece of single track, you'd go, how'd that guy ever get a mountain bike podcast? Because, yeah, I don't have the greatest skills in the world. But I started riding in the early 90s, like really looking at riding. Yeah, I want to make this part of my regular activity. Got a mountain bike, rode a lot, rode it with friends, but didn't really pick up the racing bug until about 2000. That's when I said, okay, road bikes. And I started making that connection. Okay, road bikes, group rides, time trials, get involved in a club. Then suddenly somebody's handing you a jersey and going, hey, why don't you jump on that crit? Right. Next thing you know, you're off and doing circles at 30 miles an hour.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as I get old, I find I have no interest in crit racing.
Mm.
I
Don't
did
blame
that when I was younger.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little
Guys,
wild.
keep talking. I got an animal that's freaking out right now, so
Okay.
just keep talking. I'll be right back.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, all right, Michael. Well, so let's talk about the podcast. So
Sure.
how did the um that first of all, I want to say I really love the dynamics between you and Fatty. I feel like you
Mhm.
guys really play off
Yeah.
each other really well. Are you guys were you longtime friends before the podcast, or that's just something you got
Yeah.
kind of thrown together?
Well, our relationship started via another podcast that he and I were both involved in. That's Red Kite Prayers, which is now the Cycling Independent.
Okay.
We started the pace line. In fact, I started the pace line. I started the pace line after getting fired. I got fired for one of my broadcast jobs, and I was looking for something to do. I didn't really want to go jumping right back into mainstream media because I kind of gotten burned out on it too. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the problems with mainstream media, as compared to podcasting, in fact, is that it's a highly disposable product. Right? You're a news reporter. You go out and do your story. Say it's the fire up in Healdsburg, which is burning up there. You do that
Yep.
story. You put it to bed, and it vaporizes. It's gone. Right? You've
Mm-hmm.
got really almost nothing to show for it. You have nothing to show for your work. But podcasting, at least, there's kind of a running record of
Yeah.
everything you've done. So when I got fired in 2015, I started looking for stuff to do. I was looking at new media and maybe, something other than mainstream broadcast media, which I'd kind of gotten burned out on. And I'll never forget asking some, not really mentors, but people I trusted, people who had actually hired me in the past, like, what do you think of this podcasting thing? This is in 2015. Podcasting had some momentum in 2015, just not what it has now. And they said, "Oh, no, that's not going to be anything. Don't bother yourself with podcasting. I forget that. Go back into media. That's where you belong. You're a broadcaster, right? You're a news guy." I'm like, "Okay, well, whatever." I kind of poked around with a little bit. I did end up kind of going back into media, but in the meantime, I was doing some writing for Red Kite Prayer. Patrick Brady ran that blog site. He now has a Cycling Independent. He brought me on board. Oh, he brought me on board probably in 2011 or 12. He and I had raced together. We were in the same club together. He had me doing product reviews and stuff like that. The occasional commentary. Um, I, I kind of struggle with the writing half. I find it laborious. I have a hard time coughing that stuff up in a
Mm-hmm.
timely fashion. But I kept poking at Patrick. I'm like, man, this Red Kite Prayer, your blog site is ripe for a podcast. Like everything you do here screams podcast, right? You should be doing it. He was like, I don't really hear myself. I don't like my voice. People, all those normal excuses. I don't really hear this blog site having a podcast. But eventually I pushed and pushed. And I said, look, I'll do everything. I'll
Yeah.
script the show. I'll format it. I'll find out how it gets distributed. Just leave it all to me. All you have to do is show up and promote. And he said, okay, but I did promise Eldon Fatty Nelson that if I did a podcast, I'd also do it with him. I was like, okay, I guess we can have a third wheel on this thing. So
Did you know
we,
Fatty at that time?
let me see. I think I did not know him at the time.
Okay.
I had run into him once at a Leadville qualifier, and
Okay.
I'd read his blog a bunch, Fat Cyclist, but
Mm-hmm.
he and I really didn't know each other before. When did we start? We started the pace line. I think the first show went out in January 2016. We really didn't know each other before that. I just knew of him. He was an entity. He was a well-known guy by
Mm-hmm.
then based on his blog. So I knew who he was. So that's how we started. We started doing the pace line with Patrick, and it was a good show. I tried to format it and keep it pushing forward. I think there was a feeling that, maybe it should be more of a talk format, more free flowing. I like things more formatted. I come from a radio background, so I like to, kind of more compartmentalize things and develop little stories here and there, or focus on one thing in particular for a show.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing about the pace line is inevitably, Fatty and I would just start talking about Leadville in that show. In
Oh,
this,
really?
yeah, we would, and poor Patrick, he has no Leadville experience. He wants nothing to do with the race. He hates altitude. But Fatty and I'd always bring up Leadville this, Leadville that. It would just come up in every show. And one day, Fatty just said to me, he just said, "Hey, what if we did a show about Leadville?" And I was like, "Really? A whole podcast about the Leadville Trail 100?" He's like, "Yeah, I think we can do it. I think I can find people who will support it. I think we should do a show about Leadville. I'm like, okay, I guess so. I was the kind of the reluctant one. I was a little uncertain about this idea of doing a show about the Leadville Trail 100.
So now you're Patrick.
So not well, yeah, sort of, yeah. Just in the
Yeah.
context of I want to do podcasts, and I think they're a totally viable piece of medium. But
Yeah.
I was a little uncertain about this idea about doing a show about Leadville. But at Fatty's kind of at his insistence and his convincing, I said, okay, I'll get involved with you and we'll do it. And we did. We had a good rapport even back then. We had an understanding about how we heard shows, right? What we thought we deserved an audience, how to structure a show. He likes, I think, my sensibility about how to use music and how to kind of put lipstick on the pig and make it kind of sound better than maybe it really is. He liked all that. He liked the fact that I brought a technical side to things and he could focus maybe more on the creative content side of things. So we could really yin and yang it, especially at the beginning there. And we immediately started mapping out the show and what it should sound like and some of the kind of the departments we'd have and maybe some of the interviews we'd have, the discussion points we'd have. And we launched, almost 7 seasons ago, we launched that thing.
Yeah.
So it's been going since then.
Well, Dave nor I have done it, and it is a bucket lister for a lot of cyclists. And I would put, I definitely want to do it. I have had some really adverse reactions to altitude, and so that would be a challenge for me. And I was looking through the episodes, and you guys cover altitude. You guys cover that's what I really love about it, is when it's so focused on one, event, that, if somebody wants to do this event, they should absolutely be starting at episode 1 and just going through and just getting all of the little nuggets, even though the courses changes a little bit each year, but you're still getting some great advice in there. And yeah, I know I've been really enjoying it.
How do you do 7 seasons of it when, it's an annual event? I mean, and just enlighten our audience, just because,
I'm gonna go back to my news training here. The one thing you had to do as a news person is find a new way to tell the same story over and over again. So a radio news guy sits down and he not only just covers a story, but he may have to go on the air 4 or 5, 6 times a day with that same story. And his job is, or her job is, to keep telling that story, but in a different way or with a new angle every time. Same with the news anchor. Like, they're writing their newscast. It's basically the same grouping of stories all day, unless a few things change. They're just trying to find inventive ways to like mix and match and bring new things to light. And the same thing kind of came out of the podcast. We just focused on, obviously there are big things to cover with Leadville, as with any large endurance race. I mean, the outlier there, of course, is altitude. I think without the altitude of Leadville's sitting in Walnut Creek, at the base of Mount Diablo, it's not really the race that it is, right? So the altitude is the biggie, and so, but the rest of it is kind of, you can apply it to Unbound, or you can apply it to a BWR race. How to dial your nutrition, right? How to taper, how to get fitness, right? The mental aspect. What kind of mental games are you playing? The 8 billion ways to figure out hydration, right? How to set up your bike properly. Like, those types of topics are universal, and they can be applied not only to Leadville, but a lot of places. And we have just found ways to keep, pulling those levers, but maybe finding a new guest or a new angle or a new thing that we haven't quite got into yet. So you'll notice that the topics have, I mean, I think if you were to look at the catalog, you would find recurring themes, but just kind of new little nuggets and insights to each one of those themes that we've gone on. I mean, season 2 was more of a storytelling year, where we just kind of interviewed people about their Leadville experience or how they got to Leadville or what have you. But I think overall what you see is, you'll probably see some ongoing themes in there, and then Fatty and I just finding new ways to talk about those, or new information maybe that's come out about those.
Yeah, I really like the most recent one. I think it's the most recent one with the women. And then what was it? Lisa and Melissa. They're the mother-daughter, right?
Yes, they are. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just really appreciated, like, there's so much information there that as a man, like you would never go there. But
Right, right.
we all have female friends that ride. And so instead of me having to say something awkward, I would just wouldn't even do it. But I could say, hey, you know what? Check out this Leadville podcast, because there's some really useful stuff in there. And then these two women going back and forth. It's just, there's a lot of things that are kind of taboo to talk about, but because it's these two women, it was just I thought that was really great
Yeah,
and
all
really,
that
really
Fatty
different.
deserves all the credit for that. First of all, Lisa's his wife and Lisa's his stepdaughter. But he really put together that show. That was his. He said we should do this. I'm like, okay, you put it together. I'll handle the rest. And so that all credit goes to him on that show. But the show itself, Fatty and I have tried to make a conscious effort to not sound like two dudes or make it a dude centric show. Even
Hmm.
though Leadville, right? It's like at the start line, um, the number of women is around 10 to 12%. It's not a big number, but we know we have to make sure that we're not just making it a dude fest, a dude ranch. And that's
Yeah.
why, like this year, we've had Hannah Otto on, we've had Rose Grant on before, Celine Yeager's been a guest before. We always trying to say to ourselves each season, we want women on the show. Who's it going to be? What are we going to have them talk about? So yeah,
Yeah.
but on that show in particular, that's all Fatty.
I
I
know
think
that.
we, I think we've done the same thing too, trying to, have that broad. And I think we all, is it fair to say that we have an obligation to do it? But it's just, we want more women involved in the sport, and their stories are unique, and their
Yeah.
stories are, and I just think we all have a, you know, I don't know, I go back to it, I went down to watch the Northern California, the crit championships 2 weeks ago, right? And the pro 1, 2, 3 field for men was, I think, 71. And then the women lined up and it was like 9,
Hmm.
Yeah.
and then, and of those 9, I think some of them were actually even what were like really cat threes, not pro, not 1, 2. So there was just this disparity. And it's just such a shame because there was such talent in that race, but it really wasn't a race. And I had a
Hmm.
dear friend that was in it, but it's a shame that there's that kind of disparity.
Yeah,
And
Well,
I think
cyclists.
that's not news to anyone, but I just
No.
think we all have that obligation to advocate on the part of women.
Frankly, over the time of the Leadville course, I have found the women's stories to be more interesting than the men's, and their advice sometimes more interesting and more attainable. Like I can identify with a woman's ride better than I can the pro men. Like those guys are out of reach. I don't know what that is. I don't know what
right.
Keegan does. Like that guy is crazy.
It's
But
ridiculous.
I can
Yeah.
identify with Rose Grant and her pacing strategy because she
Mhm.
says like they don't have Keegan or that kind of driving force at the front of the race. They're kind of out there riding for themselves for the most part. It's changing. Like the women's race is becoming more pack oriented. We see that at Unbound and at Leadville. I think that'll
Yeah.
start to happen. But for the time being, it's been, those ladies take off the start line, and then they're largely left to twos and threes or maybe solo efforts. And that means they have to learn how to pace themselves. Well, I can identify with that, and most Leadville racers can, because that's what it's going to be for them. It's going to be them trying to pace themselves back to Sixth and Harris.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
fascinating.
it is. I mean, the industry's, it's a bunch of dudes. I work for
It
Giant,
is. Yeah.
all the outside reps. I mean, we're all dudes. We've had some gals on the outside over the year. I've been with Giant for 22 years, and we have had some outside reps, but it's so few and far between.
Yeah.
But to Dave's point, we always seek out those stories. Our podcast is about people in the bike industry, different career paths, all these interesting people in the world of cycling, and we just want to shine a light on them. But we do make a point of trying to uh, get more women on the show, not because just because there needs to be more women that engage with cycling. I mean, all of us would like to see that, you know. It's been great to watch these last couple of years with what's happening with the World Tour stuff.
Yeah.
You know, finally they're getting some respect. You know, they're letting them, you know, they're having them race some of these tough events where they previously UCI thought they weren't tough enough, which is ridiculous.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's just really cool to see it happening at the World Tour stage. So hopefully there'll be some trickle down. You know, I think all of us, you mentioned the Tour de France, all of us have been inspired at one point or another, either by the tour or something else. And hopefully there's women all around the world that are getting inspired by the stuff that's happening, you know.
Agreed. Yep.
Speaking of inspiration, there's these documentaries on Netflix. Have you watched the TDF Unchained?
I tried to sit through a couple of those. I guess I just didn't. They didn't draw me in. I'm a big Drive to Survive fan. Love that. I've watched almost all. I think I need to finish two more of those.
Well,
Side
I'm
note, I
not
went
e
to my first Formula One race last weekend too. I went up to Montreal. Really a lot of fun. Got my
Oh, wow.
Marginal Gains blood going there. I can tell you that. So no, I've not. I tried watching a few of them, but I guess I just didn't get drawn in by them. Not like I do Drive to Survive.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm the other way. I'm just like completely enamored. Uh, and there was another one too, The Least Expected Day. This was followed Movistar around.
Mm-hmm.
And those guys are so dramatic and they're
Mm-hmm.
just the team's a mess.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I mean, I loved it. I ate that thing up. They did 3 seasons of it. I don't know if there's going to be another one, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it didn't come out as a real flattering piece on Movistar, you know?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
just seemed like I kept thinking to myself, man, this is the World Tour stage. This is what this is like, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just kind of surprising. I would always, you know, you race here in America and, you know, it's just kind of not the thing it is in Europe. And you think, oh, well, to get over there, and then you get on a big team with $1 million bus and all this other stuff, you know, you'd think that it would be really buttoned up and dialed in, but it's depending on the team, I'm sure. But
Sure.
Movistar definitely was an example of like, oh man,
Mhm.
wow, that's how it is. Really
Yeah, I
surprising.
don't think you're going to find that with most of the teams now. There's too much at stake. They're trying to just survive. First of all, the sport's trying to survive.
Yep.
I think there's just too much at stake for them to kind of be that kind of loosey goosey, almost that. You know, I listened to Ted King on his recent show, interview Mahorich, and they talked
Mhm.
about the old Cannondale days. That it was an Italian team and how kind of wacky things were back then about just almost the guesswork involved about nutrition and training. And so
Yeah.
it's much more buttoned down now. If you listen to Josh Portner or Marginal Gains at all, you really get a feeling for how those folks are really diving into the little things and trying to find any little advantage and leaving no stone unturned and tossing aside things that just clearly have not don't aren't supported by data or real good science and focusing on the things that are.
Yeah.
Like bar tape on an uphill time trial.
Yeah, like bar tape on an uphill time trial. Why do you need it? You don't.
Well,
You're
you know,
only
I was laughing because they showed the who was it, Almeida and Yates took the bar tape off and you know, and I'm just waiting for my next. And I'm sorry because I probably offend some of my friends, but I'll probably wait. And how many weeks? And I told my wife this: how many weeks before I'm out on my Saturday group ride and people are riding with no bar tape?
well.
Oh yeah.
There's a
It'll
line there between pro and pro racing for his life and his right and us. I think there's some
yeah.
room for interpretation there, and we try to make that on Marginal Gains. Like we know that everything we talk about for the highest level pro is just not appropriate for right the regular person out on a group ride. They're free to use it. I mean,
I
I
was
think
gonna say
chain
that's not
waxing is
stopping. Yeah, that's not
yeah,
stopping anybody.
no, not at all. One of the areas I think is good for both, absolutely good for both, is chain waxing. I mean, I think
Yeah.
we're getting to a point now where chain waxing is starting to gain a lot of good traction. People are starting to understand that this is not just a speed thing. In fact, it's not more than anything for the three of us sitting here. It's
Mhm.
a parts longevity thing. Like you want to make your stuff last. What's a new red group cost? What are those new cassettes going for?
Right.
right? I don't know. They're more than what I want to pay, and I certainly don't want to replace them. And God forbid you wear out a set of chain rings on that group, because not only you out chain rings, you're out a power meter. Like that's just the whole thing's got to go. You're replacing a lot of parts there, and
Yeah.
so that's a marginal gain like chain waxing really becomes, I think, relevant to a broader spectrum of cyclists because it's more than just a speed thing, right? It really
Hmm.
is. And I think the same goes for proper tire pressure. Like, proper tire pressure should be something that more people pay attention to, as opposed to just running out to the garage and cranking their tires up to 100 and calling it good. I mean, you're not improving your ride quality by doing that by any stretch. Never mind the speed,
Right.
because you're throwing speed out the window. You're throwing watts out the window by not paying attention to tire pressure. And it's just ride quality too. Like, don't you want a nicer ride?
Yeah.
And a nicer ride is not going to come from a firm tire. A nicer ride's going to come from something softer. You don't want it too soft, because then the thing's going to wash out and not handle well, or you're going to pinch flat it. But I
Yeah.
mean, so
Well,
some of it
I,
just, I think, has a broader appeal than just that top level pro.
no, I
agreed.
love the concept too. I mean, I just, in my own simple world, like I just, I like to break things down into bits, right? Like I
Mhm.
don't clean my bathroom. I'll clean the toilet one day, I'll clean the sink the next day because it's done, right? Boom, boom, boom. You know what I mean? Break it down into small chunks, right?
Yeah.
And I think that what we as cyclists, or many do, is they literally try to boil the ocean. I'm going to buy a $12,000 road bike, and therefore I'm going to be fast because it's lighter. And it's
Mhm.
really more the aggregate of
Mhm.
these little things, right? And
Yep.
that's where you're going with this, right? And
Yep.
because there's a guy that's 65 and competing at a very high level around here, and he's got, an old carbon frame Cannondale with no disc brakes. There's no electronic shifting, but he just does all the other things right,
Yep. Yeah.
and so.
Yeah, the only thing he's going to lose a little on there are aerodynamics. I mean, like, unless he has a good set of wheels, if he has the right set of wheels, then even then he's not losing too much. If he has exposed cables and maybe tube shaping isn't optimized on an older bike like that, he's probably giving away something. But if he's doing everything else good, wearing a nice form-fitting jersey, he's got the right helmet on, aero socks, good deep carbon wheels, pays attention to tire pressure, waxes or optimizes his drivetrain, right? If he's doing all that, so keeps a clean bike, right? Doesn't tape his top of his bars. I mean, if he's doing the rest of that, then yeah, the older frame, right? Even with exposed cables, he's probably going to still be faster than the guy next to him.
Yeah.
What
No,
do we
no,
mean? What do
no
we
car.
mean aero socks? Like I'm tracking with the rest of it all, but what are we talking about with aero socks?
Well, aero socks, just think about one of the worst aerodynamic shapes. It's anything round, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that would be your legs, especially the lower portion of your legs are going to be round objects, and you have a lot of airflow coming straight at your legs. So whatever you can do to reshape that air, or at least condition that air to behave properly, is going to be a win for you. So the air, I'm sorry, the wind tunnel has shown that the airflow around the ankles and the lower legs is extremely disturbed if there's no sock on or just a regular sock on. But if you can put a sock on there that's textured properly, it's going to help flow attachment. The air is going to move around the front of the leg and then reattach at the backside, which is what you want. That's what good aerodynamics is. If you think of an airplane wing, the air comes right over the front of that wing and then reattaches at the back. That's all you're really trying to do with a lot of this stuff. You just want the air to reattach again. Or if it's not reattaching, you just want to make sure it's following some other type of surface and then reattaches again. That's all, what's going on in Formula One. The reason why the racing is so screwed up at times, why guys don't follow each other, is those
Yeah,
wings on
sorry.
the cars are fluttering air up in the air and just circulating air everywhere. It's not attached. It's not clean air. All
Right.
you're trying to do as a cyclist is just make clean air behind you. You want the air to reattach and be clean again, and aero socks help you do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have a set of aero socks. I haven't gone that far yet, but it's on the wish list. I might get a
It,
set.
here's the deal.
Yeah.
It is cheap, low hanging fruit, and the watt savings are better than any of these oversized pulling wheels. For
Yeah.
$20 or 25, I don't know what Silka's aero socks are now. that is cheap and easy stuff. And why not? You got to wear socks anyhow.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you don't totally believe it. Like, well, I don't know. But why not? And other people are jumping in. Like Silk is not the only one. I think Defeat now has an Aero sock out now, or
Okay.
Sock Guy, one or the other. I saw them post something the other. They have an Aero sock out now. So it's one of those why not type of things. You got to wear socks anyhow.
Well, listen, I was listening to you and Fatty break down cargo bibs. Okay. And I'm riding, I love cargo bibs. I'm riding in cargo bibs. I got three food wrappers in my mesh pocket while you guys are breaking down just how bad that is. And I'm thinking like, oh, well, dang it.
It's bad if you're up to speed.
Yep.
Right. So if you're up to speed, it's bad. If you're cruising around in your mountain bike or a trail bike, it's probably not that. But you probably have baggies on then, which are really bad, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was surprised too when the team at Aeromind and Josh said, "Hey, what would you guys like tested?" I said, "Well, why don't you test cargo bibs, because a lot of the gravelers are wearing those, and put some stuff in them and see." I thought maybe there'd be a watt there of loss. When they came back with those numbers, I thought, really, they need to redo that. I still think they should probably redo the test just to see. But yeah, it was shocking.
It's like 10 watts, right? I mean,
like 10 watts there. Yeah.
So crazy.
It's really nuts. But again, airflow, that surface, right? That normally smooth Lycra surface has now been disrupted by something in those side panels, right? Crumpled up or whatever, right? And that sticky outy bits, as Josh likes to call them, are just no good for airflow. They just send the air in all manner of direction. So you've lost control of your airflow at that point, and trash in your cargo bibs evidently is a problem.
So you've touched on a few things, but let's assume for a minute that our audience is the average cyclist, like me and Mike, and we're not. If you had to list the top 5 things that someone could do inexpensively, I think you've touched on a few of them, but what would you say the top 5 marginal gain things are that could really have an impact? All right, we've got aero socks. You said a good helmet.
Yeah. Will come as no surprise to anybody who's heard the show. I'm going to say drivetrain. Are you talking about stuff beyond aerodynamics, right? Not just aerodynamics. I would say for sure drivetrain, like clean drivetrain, make sure your drivetrain's clean all the time. And if you can get into it, wax your chain. If not, at the very least, get a good high quality lube on your chain and keep the chain clean. Problem with lubes is most lubes, they lube for a short amount of time and then they just attract dirt. And then you just have a gritty mess in there. Then you're building a paste and you're actually, losing more watts than the drivetrain really should. Wax is the best way to go. It's going to keep things clean. It's going to keep things quiet. It is the fastest option too if you need all that. Then the next best option is a quality drip lube. Silka has the super secret. There are other lubes out there too. UFO has a really, really good drip lube as well. So I would say that. Remember though, the bigger point here, I think, with drivetrain efficiency is clean. You want your drivetrain to stay clean, right? For a lot of reasons. To save those parts and for efficiency and to go faster if that's your thing, right? Whatever that is. If you want to put a new chain on every day, fine, go ahead. But that's kind of the goal there. We think that wax is the best way to do that, right? Aero socks we talked about. I think we're clear on that, right? It's low-hanging fruit. It's cheaper than oversized pulling wheels, right? A lot cheaper. You can buy I don't know how many socks for what those things cost. I like the idea of an aero helmet. I mean, obviously that is something that is immediately facing the wind, right? So an aero helmet. I interviewed Kristen Legan for the Leadville 100 podcast this year. She is a lifetime Grand Prix. She also works with Shimano a lot on the media side. She last year won the 350 XL in Kansas. And she told me that she will be mirroring for all the events, unless it is a super hot day, for all the off-road events where the average speed is 20 miles an hour for the ladies, maybe a little less. She will always wear an aero helmet, because she just figures at some time she's going to be going more than 20 miles or more than 13 miles an hour, which is kind of the break point. She's going to be going 20 and 30 miles an hour, whether it be on her mountain bike or on her gravel bike. It's just going to happen. And when those times happen, she wants to make sure that, at least from a helmet perspective, she's optimized. So I would say aero helmet. They look kooky. I get it. I don't
Yeah.
even like looking at them so much, but they do work. The Aero Road helmets do work, and they've gotten really good too these days.
Mhm.
It's interesting
Easy
you said
one
that
is, sorry.
about the thing that hits the wind. When Mark Cavendish first came on the scene and Boonen was kind of at his peak, they were comparing their styles, and they showed Boonen racing with his head down. This is the way he raced.
Yeah.
Cavendish raced with his head up. And they said they were making that comparison, that this is one of the differences. Like Boonen's got this whole thing going boom, boom, boom. Cavendish has got the airflow going over it. So it, makes total sense.
The easiest, and probably this should be number one, really. The easiest thing you can do is get a proper fitting jersey. And if you can get an aero cut or a race cut jersey, get one of those jerseys. And I know some people that get the tight fit, it shows off maybe a roll or two, and I get it. But if you're looking to cheat the wind, what is facing the wind? It's your upper body. Like, that's the thing. This is the thing that's really slowing you down. It's you, right? It's you. That's where we mentioned helmet, jersey, socks. You are the reason, you are the thing you are fighting most to propel your bike forward, not your tires or the condition of the pavement or the guy next to you or anything. It is you. That's the hardest bit about pedaling a bike, is getting yourself through the wind. So having a form-fitting jersey is a no-brainer, for the group ride, for the race, for even mountain bikers. I think even a cross-country mountain biker, right, who or even an enduro rider. I think what you're even seeing in downhill racing these days is, UCI has got some quirky rules about what those racers are allowed to wear, but you see some people getting creative in downhill racing, tightening things up, making sure the suits aren't too loosey goosey. They know that there's something to be had there, even when pedaling for them is an act of getting out of the starting gate.
Yeah.
I wince when we pass someone on a Saturday and even when they've got a jacket on, and you can hear it flapping in the wind, or they have a jacket with a hood and it's filled up. And it's like, it's a dragster with a parachute on the back.
Yeah,
so
that's the sound of watts going away. I guess the other thing, you look for 5, shave your legs.
okay, that's gonna say, myth.
Yeah, shave your legs. Doesn't cost anything. Costs a razor and some shaving cream. So shave your legs. Just go look at that old Specialized video. We had Mark Cody on he's now with Zwift, but he was one of the gentlemen who was in charge of developing Specialized wind tunnel, and he said even they were pretty surprised at how much savings there was. So shave your legs. That's an easy one to do.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to ask you about your relationship with Silka, because Silka has like a lot of, first, I mean, they're renowned for high quality, everything that they are engaged with. It's really the really high level stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they sponsor the Marginal Gains podcast.
Yep.
And there's been a lot of talk about this 3D printing of parts and whatnot, and all the different parts that I was really stunned at just how many parts they're actually making. Have you been to the factory, or have you seen any of this firsthand?
I'm basically a subcontractor for Silka as far as the podcast goes. I'm a hired gun for Josh to help him get that show out. So I've not been. A funny note is Josh and I actually met here in LA last week. He was on layover going to Australia, so we were actually in person together. But I've not been out to Silka yet. I've always told people, because I'm semi-retired, if there's one place though, or one person I would go back to work for, like if Silka were in my backyard, it'd be Josh and it'd be Silka. That's a great company. So I've not been out to see the 3D printing yet, but that's become a large part of what Silka is doing. Even though, I think their front-facing stuff are pumps and the socks and the chain waxing, and that's kind of the thing they're really known for. But behind the scenes, they're cranking out 3D parts. Now you can buy, and stuff's available to the public. If you don't mind $75 for a pair of mountain bike cleats, they will sell you a mighty fine pair of SPD cleats.
Yeah. And they're 3D printed. Are they in Thai?
Mm-hmm. They're in titanium, yeah.
Yeah.
They're not as deep as the OEM ones. They're a little shallower because they don't need all the material for the strength. That's what makes them lighter. So that, and you can walk across your hardwood floor and not scrape up your floor as easy. So because they don't need all the material, right, for the engagement, for the strength.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. Well, I think, it'd be fun to get over there and see some of that stuff in person,
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
yeah, really curious about just that whole process, I remember visiting a buddy of mine had a CNC machine, and then watching how he'd program that and then watch this thing go to town, I guess it's similar probably, but
With much less waste, I think, right? I mean,
yeah.
you're basically catting something up and then sending that design to a printer, which can then use your raw material in powder form to make your product without as much waste. With CNCing, right, you've got all that extra scrap that falls off, and I mean, the good guys, I think, like Paul Components and these people, they find the right thing to do with that stuff in the end. But yeah,
Yeah.
but it's those type printers are. I remember Josh getting it. He was quite excited, but also quite stressed out because of the expense involved. And yeah, it's a
Yeah.
big undertaking. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's nuts. I had a family friend. He was actually working for a company in SoCal, and they were 3D printing rockets
Mhm.
that they were going to launch into space. So they were just printing parts of rockets and then assembling them together. And I'm like, wow, this
You
Yeah.
know,
is
small builders and small operations and some small bike shops are getting in the act too. I interviewed a bike shop owner up in Boise. The name of the shop escapes him right now, but he had the 3D printer right on site there, so he could help triathletes set up their aero bars, and he could develop the right stack for their pads, right, and get everything dialed for them. So he had his own little 3D printer there. He was doing his own work there. So yeah, very cool.
Yeah. I have a shop that I deal with in Clovis, and one of the guys, he does 3D printing also.
Hmm.
Yeah. I think a lot of the, manufacturing quote unquote norms, I mean, it's already really changing. And these next few years with AI and all the stuff that's coming down the pipe, it's gonna get super weird. So
Yeah.
it is exciting though, and the possibilities are endless. I always marvel at like the bicycle and there's times when you have a bike and you just think, how much better could it possibly get? Because it's at such a level. Everything is just so ergonomic and works so great, and everything, it's just so buttoned up. Hundred plus years we've been making these things.
Mhm.
And yet, you know,
They keep
they
doing
just
it. Yeah.
they just keep doing it every
Yeah.
year. It's like I'm waiting on a new bike right now, and I can't wait to get this day. So yeah, it's part of the fun about being in this industry. I think is
Yeah.
the constant innovation and whatnot.
Yeah.
You brought up Paul. So in my I travel. I'm an outside rep. And I go to Chico, and I have a good buddy of mine works over at Paul, and I've been through there a bunch, and yeah, they're really, it's a neat little company in Chico, and yeah, they built some amazing stuff, and they're
Hmm.
very responsible with uh their overall operation, and
Yep.
it's really a smart, cool company,
Yeah.
and staying in Chico, that makes it cool too,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so
I
not
love
too.
his YouTube videos too. All his
Oh
little
yeah.
tip videos. He's the greatest. I just
Yeah.
love his approach to it. We don't
Yeah.
wash our bikes. I love it. He doesn't wash any of his bikes. We want to see how much they can take. I'm like, yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Classic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So, what do you have? I wanted to ask you about these people that call in on the marginal gains,
Mhm.
and then you take questions in a number of different ways. What percentage of questions do you get that are legitimate? Like, do you get a bunch of just nonsense, or do you actually, like, I listened to this one guy, he was asking about tire pressure versus full suspension, and it was just like this really, I mean, it was like I was having a hard time, folks. I'm riding my bike. I'm listening to this guy. Yeah, he lost me. But
Yeah.
so that was like a real high level question. How many questions do you have to go through to get to something like that?
We to get something like that, I don't know. There's easily dozens. We always have more questions that we can get to, and they're all good. I
Oh,
can't.
okay.
It's
Yeah.
rare that we see something we go. Now, sometimes it's something we've answered before, but
Mhm.
rarely is there an outright reject. We go, well, that's silly business. I mean, we get criticized, but that's because it's going to happen in media. But we don't. They're all good. That audience, they're very, very deep thinkers about what they're into. And the thing we have to be careful of is we don't have too many questions like, tire pressure, full suspension mountain biking, stuff that's going to like send the listener tail spinning, right?
Right.
I mean, we've got to find room for other stuff in there too, something with some levity, or right. It can't all be so deep.
Yeah, I guess when I heard that question, I was just thinking, I guess because it's such a focused podcast, and it's gonna attract the neophyte racer guy looking for the edge, guy or gal, and then also all the engineering kind of nerds, and I mean that with respect. But the people that really geek out on the details and the nuances of little things. So yeah, I just was thinking about our podcast. If we open it up to questions, I don't know how that would go.
Danger, yeah.
Yeah,
Marginal
danger.
Gains gets a large number of non-cyclists who listen to it. For instance, my nephew, he's an engineering he's now an engineer down in San Diego. He listens all the time. He doesn't touch it. Well, he has a bike, but he has a
Right.
knee like it's a folding bike or something. He's not competitive. He could care less. He doesn't follow racing. He just loves the right. He just loves the attitude, the talk, right? He likes to
Yeah.
hear stuff like hysteresis explored or pop bifurcation, or that's where his brain works. And so we draw in all types of people who are just hungry for that type of speak.
Yeah.
Really? Oh,
Sure. Yeah.
It is really interesting. I mean, like it does take me to places that I don't normally go in my mind.
Yeah.
And now how did Fatty so the history with you and Fatty with the red kite, right?
Right. The Paceline podcast. That was the first one.
Baseline,
Yeah.
and then Leadville. Now, when it came to Marginal Gains, you were kind of the hired gun. Did you bring Fatty with you, or how did
No,
that
he
all come
brought me with.
together?
No, we pitched Josh. What we did
Oh,
is,
okay.
yeah, like, why don't you have a podcast? Was kind
Hmm.
of the thing. He's like, yeah, you're right. Why don't I have a podcast? Again, he's another one of those types that's perfect for it because it's long form. He can go on and talk about lengthy, heady subjects. And instead of trying to blog all that stuff, which that's what he was trying to do on the Silka side, he was trying to write and write. He can just come on and talk about it. Just build a little outline, and then Fatty and I can put some questions in for some prompts in there, so to kind of keep him rolling and on target, and he
Yep.
can he can narrate or he can lecture, and really that's what the show is. I mean, the star of that show is Josh Portner.
Yeah.
He really is. Like, Fatty and I will do interviews on our own with that show once in a while, but when I'm out looking for guests, I'm always thinking of Josh first. Like, who can Josh interview? Who would be good for him? Which is a challenge too, because it's like, okay, we can't. Can we just talk about? Can we do racer interviews? Yeah, we've done a few of those, but you'll notice there's not a lot of that in there, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
we interview the racers who are really into that stuff, right? We're going to have an Alex Dowsett on, right? He's
Hmm.
totally into that marginal gain stuff. He throws the word around himself,
Hmm.
but if the racer is not keen on it, we're gonna have a hard time. Where's our jumping off point with somebody like that? So that's the challenge with that show, especially when it comes to guests. Is like, who can we find as a guest who's going to speak the marginal gains? And we've done some, we've had a series of interviews on that I have pursued where we tried to talk to kind of the leading race directors, especially in the off-road space these days, because that's such a growth area of the sport. Not only
Hmm.
is it a growth area racing wise, marginal gains is growing in that area. We're seeing a lot happening with people now. They've got a taste of the Unbounds and the off-road events in the world. Now they want to win them, and now they have competition, and so we all know what happens then. We're all looking for the edge, and
Yeah.
so we've tried to target a series of those people too. But largely we're focused on that technical minded person, and we try to always find a way for Josh to be involved in as much as possible. He was running a company, and again, I had lunch with him the other day. He's flying off to Australia, and then next month he'll be in Europe, and the next month he'll be you know tinkering with his 3D type printer, or what have you. So he's got a lot on his plate. So
Yeah.
he is the star. He's the reason that show exists.
Well, I think the long form for somebody like him, and I think, you know, I feel like consumers of media a lot of times have been uh like it's like, it's got to be short. It's got to be tight. You don't want to go into the weeds, keep it top level so you don't lose people. But I really think that, like when I watch TV and they've got like 2 panelists or 3 panelists. I hate this format, right? And they're
Yeah.
talking about something very complicated, and all 3 of them are talking over each other, and then it's like 7 minutes or 8 minutes, and then boop, commercial, and then they come back and it's like that conversation never even took place, and then there's something else
Right.
happening, and it's like that was nothing. That was nothing. Whereas like when you listen to somebody like Josh, or even you and Fatty breaking down Leadville, you really have a chance to really expand on it. You're not rushing to make these bullet points just so you don't lose people before the commercial break.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Fatty knows this about me. I cannot stand a show that has more than 3 people in it. Like, I kind of go out of my mind when there's 4 or more voices. I just go, no way. We've done a few shows with had 4. I think we did when Shimano launched Di2 12 speed for Durace and Ultegra. We had 2 people from Shimano on, and Josh, Fatty, and I. That was 5. I'm like, oh, I was at my limit with that stuff, because especially in the audio only setting, and you got 5 male white dudes, right? Talking at once. To me, it's a bit much. So they know that about me too. That I'm like, it's 3. This is a 3-way show at best. So I agree.
Yeah.
I think it could get. I think you start ping ponging the audience a little too much, right? They have a hard time. Who am I following? Boom, boom. Right. So, and they get enough of that anyhow. This is a
Right.
format for a little more deep thinking. Something that's targeted. I mean, we are. I like to say about podcasting, especially the stuff that we do with Marginal Gains and Leadville, we're a niche within a niche, right? It's
Yeah.
cycling, and then it's this part of cycling. In fact, it might be a niche within a niche within a niche, for that matter. We've really kind of narrowed the pie. And that's the beauty of podcasting. That's what you can do with it. You can really identify an audience and go, okay, what exactly does this audience want? And then serve that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you're doing a great job on both the podcasts. I'm not as far into the Marginal Gain. Do you have fewer episodes? I think there's only, what is there, 39 episodes?
No, there's 100.
Oh, is there really?
15 or something. Yeah, we celebrated our 100th. Oh, when was it? Was that the first of the year? And it has a total of cumulative more than 1 million downloads.
Wow.
Yeah. So that shows 115 or something like that. I can't.
Oh, okay.
Recall.
All right. I had my numbers wrong.
I would say go back and listen to some of the early shows where Josh is doing what I would say his lectures on topics like CDA and hysteresis. So you kind of get a nice kind of feeling for some of the recurring themes that we come back to a lot, whether you're talking about tires and rolling resistance or aerodynamics. He really kind of breaks those down. That, and we did this past spring and winter, we did kind of a series of shows on wind tunnels and what they're about and who should go to one, and some of the movers and shakers who were involved in wind tunnel in the early days. So those have been really good.
Yeah.
Dan Bigham interview when he just broken the hour record before Filippo snagged it, or was it before? I can't remember which. Really excellent Marginal Gains mind. So there's some good pickings in there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
There's two questions for me, if you could, and I hope this isn't too mundane, but I'm just thinking about our audience, right? So you mentioned the top 5 marginal gains, and a lot of that was road. How different are they from the gravel guy? I'm thinking about the gravel. I'm thinking about Unbound. I'm thinking about our friend Vince Murdoch, who just did it. And I'm trying to figure out where the marginal gains are when you're going through peanut butter mud.
Right.
And so what are some of the things that the average gravel guy could just keep their eye on? And the cargo short thing kind of breaks my heart too, but
Right.
it's
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's
But
a lot of
Greg,
the same stuff, right? I mean, the helmet.
it is
Yeah.
actually. It may have not quite have the same effect on that kind of rider as it would somebody going faster. But you also look at it this way: the rider not achieving the same average speed as a pro is also out there longer.
Yeah.
So they're putting up with those losses longer than the pro
Mhm.
does. So it still kind of comes back, not to the degree if you look at, when is when does aero matter? And, the rough estimate is around 13 miles an hour. That's when you
Okay.
can really start to feel a kick in. And that can happen at most races, right? Even
Mhm.
Unbound, which can be quite a slog. But I would say of the things we listed, they all are the same. You want a clean drivetrain, right? You,
Right,
you
yeah.
want an efficient running drivetrain. Now, the game may change in a severe weather day at Unbound, or any day, any place for that matter, where you have to strategize a little different. I mean, you'd have to put out a good lube strategy no matter what you're running. Just with wax, it has a slightly different protocol. You might start a day at Unbound with a wax chain. You're just going to make sure in your pit you have probably an oil-based drip lube in case you did wear through your wax through the stretch of the day. Now,
Mhm.
whatever lube you're running, it's going to get worn out before if it's a slog like it was a year ago with mud and grit everywhere, right? You're going to have
Yeah.
to, have a good strategy about how am I going to get my thing relubed as I come into one of the two stops.
Mhm.
You just got to think about it in the right way if you're running a wax chain. So wax chain or drivetrain still matters. Aero socks, I don't know. I mean, again, I'm going back to why not?
Why
Why
not?
wouldn't
Right.
you
Yeah.
have it? It's
Yeah.
free. It's a free speed. You're probably going to go over 13 miles an hour a couple times a day, and you got to wear socks anyhow.
Yeah, it's already
I,
happening. I can hear my wife going, but you have a drawer full of socks. I
Yeah.
know, but you had to listen to the podcast.
You
well,
might punt on the aero helmet if it's a really hot day, like Kristen Ligon told me,
yeah.
the Grand Prix athlete. That's something you could kind of go, do I absolutely need an aero helmet? No, if your speeds are largely slower and you're riding in hot conditions, you're going, yeah, that's when you're going to want to, not mess with, because at that point you're going to need the venting. At that point, your heat losses, the power you're losing because your body's trying to cool itself is going to be greater than whatever aerodynamic gains you get, right? So you're going to want to go with the vented helmet at that point. At that point, cooling is more advantageous than aerodynamics, right?
Yeah.
What else did we mention? Shave your legs.
Yeah. Of course.
You're going to shave
Yeah.
your legs, right? And you're
Yeah.
going to wear a jersey, right? You got to put a jersey on. So I
Every
think it's still
wrinkle
all,
counts.
yeah, every wrinkle
Well,
does
but yeah,
count.
that's interesting too, because in a lot of the gravel events, it's been kind of,
Flannel
the
grinder.
flannel jersey or the flannel like the button up thing, and
I wear those too.
it's
Look,
so it's so
I go out for a fire road ride with my wife all the time, and I wear something loosey goosey and comfortable because I'm not out there trying to set speed. Now, if I was out with my friends and we were trying to lay down some time, or if I was suddenly in Unbound or Rock
right.
Cobbler or one of the Grasshopper events or what have you, then
Yeah.
then the mindset changes. Like, okay, this is race time. I'm trying to lay down a time or do something competitive here. I think then that's when you start changing how you're looking at your equipment set, changing how you look at everything, training, right? Nutrition, all
Yeah.
of it. So, and what jersey you're wearing is no different.
So I have a question. So how much racing are you actually doing? You said you're 60 years old, right? So how
Mhm.
much racing are you actually doing? And then are you taking all of this marginal gains data into account with every event that you do? Is that
I do much less racing now than I used to. That's health related. I've had a health issue that it keeps me from doing anything super high speed anymore and in traffic. So I have to avoid the tarmac. Cyclocross has become my thing now because it's a
okay?
closed course, and if I fall, I fall. I have this
Yeah.
problem with I have this little blackout issue. Little, it's not little actually. So I've
Oh,
had
wow.
some syncope issues while exercising, which is no good. So I've had to curtail the racing. That said, in in cyclocross, I mean, two of the biggest marginal gains is tire pressure. Like when everyone talks about tire pressure, you got to pay attention to tire pressure.
Yeah.
And this year, I paid real close attention to what my tire pressure was and drivetrain efficiency. Like I want to make sure you still want drivetrain efficiency, right? You don't want to be picking up dirt and throwing it into your chain. You want your chain to repel dirt so the chain continues to roll smooth. So it doesn't make
Mhm.
noise. I mean, I think even that squeaking crunching sound is right. That's a negative. A mental
Mhm.
marginal gain is a quiet drivetrain in my mind. Like that means something to me. That
For
makes me
sure.
feel better about what I'm doing. If I'm not listening to some nasty chain roll over hogs on my cassette. So for sure, those two,
Yeah.
I've hit it. Now I ride a steel bike, so I don't go for the weight weenie stuff. I mean, I love my Fat Chance Chris Carr, so I ride
Uh-huh.
a it has carbon wheels and carbon fork, but so yes, I do carry those things forward from the show to what racing I'm allowed to do. And for the riding I do with my wife or whoever, I'm still always like testing things out, whether it be a new way to kind of hot wax my chain. My wife my wife's bike, it's hot waxed. I pay attention to the tire pressure on that bike, right? I've
Yeah.
changed bars out and moved her position around a little bit. She shaves her legs, which is great. So right,
Yeah.
so yes, it does. I do carry that stuff forward. Absolutely. The hard bit is the evangelism, like
Mm-hmm.
what we're doing here right now. Like for sure, there's people out in the audience going, "Oh yeah, blah blah blah." Right? Marginal gains and this. I get it. Yeah, it
Yep.
is. It is hard to lead the horses to water at times. Like they just don't want to. Like, it's what's a watt or two here. And you're right. It's not on its own. It's not that much.
Yep.
Sometimes you see there's the same people spending hundreds of dollars for oversized pulley wheels, but I
Uh-huh.
get it. It can be eye rolling stuff at times. And so the evangelism is sometimes the hard bit. I don't know if you heard the show where we said, I read a quote or a comment following a Silka hot wax station review. And some of the comments were getting kind of sarcastic. And one guy wrote, how do you know when a cyclist waxes their chain? They tell you. That's how. So, and it's true. I mean,
Yep.
and I'm one of the biggest defenders of that. I totally admit that. I tell people all the time that the hot waxing and running a clean drivetrain is truly one of the great things, one of the good things you can do for your bike and for your rides.
Well, if anybody should be talking about it, it would be the host of the freaking Marginal Gains podcast.
Yeah,
Come on.
I've gained a reputation of carrying it, I think, a little too far, but it's true. I mean, it is a tenet of the show.
Yeah. Do you have your own wax station?
Absolutely.
You
I mean,
do.
actually don't have Silkas. What I've done is I have one of the large, I think it's the 8-quart Instant Pot. So I built my station out back when Josh first launched Hot Wax. So I built mine out kind of using his blueprint plus the data and the information down at Zero Friction Cycling. Adam Kieran, by the way, folks, if you're into this subject and you really, really want to go deep on it, go check out Zero Friction Cycling. So I use all
Hmm.
that information to kind of build out my little chain spa, as I lovingly called it on the podcast. And so I have it's an 8-quart Instant Pot. And the reason why I went with it is I got 2 bags of wax in it and I can do 2 chains at once, like side by side. So I
Oh,
can pull my wife's chain off, my chain off, or if I have 2 chains I need to do, they can go in right away and I don't have to do one at a time. So that's how
great.
mine look. I have a second, what would be, I guess, a single application pot that I haven't used yet. And then I have all the cleaning chemicals. We were using mineral spirits and acetone to kind of wash these chains. Silka has the chain stripper that is just a one soak deal where you soak the chain once and it comes out clean. So yeah, so I have a full rig in there.
Yeah.
And I've
So,
offered it to fellow cyclists too, and they've come over, and some of them have stuck with it, others have not. I've tried to get them started a little bit and see if they'll latch on. I think people are gonna. I get it, and in fact I talked to Josh about this. The big barrier here is first of all the cleaning. You got to get the chain clean. I mean, you
yep.
got to get your chain clean. You really should clean it no matter what you're going to use, even if it's
Yeah.
going to be right. Even if
It's
it's
a
going to
good
be
idea. Yeah.
the cheapest lube. You want the lube really to be lubing and not the factory grease, which just tracks dirt in the end. You really should clean the chain. So I know a lot of people say, "Oh, there's all this faff involved with cleaning the chain and then waxing it." Yes, that's true, but really, it kind of applies to all lubes, if you're to be honest with yourself. But the other big barrier, I think, with chain waxing is dropping that chain once every 200 to 300 miles and dropping it in the
Hmm.
pot and then reattaching. And I get
Right.
it. People don't want, once your bike is kind of put together, do you want to take it apart? You don't.
Yeah.
Like once your
Right.
handlebars are installed, do you take them on and off all the time? You
Right.
don't. So I kind of get that people don't really dig taking their chain on and off all the time and managing, how many times did I use this quick link? I get all that. That's true.
Yeah.
That's why I asked Josh the last time I was with him. I said, what about, is there ever a chance we'll be able to hot wax with the chain on the bike? He's like, yeah, we've actually looked at that. It's really difficult. I mean, you get the chain's got to, in addition to the wax coming to the tap, you need the chain and its metals to come to the tap. So, the metals expand and make room for the wax to come in. So he says it's a really, really difficult one to ever try and figure out. So
Yeah.
I get it. I get why people go, oh, it's just a big pain in the butt. And for those people, I would say, fine. I totally get that. Just do yourself a favor, start with a clean chain and find a really good lube and use it. And continue to keep that chain clean and use a good lube and you'll be great. And check your chain too. Check it a lot.
Well, yeah, if you're not willing to do the work, just buy some oversized pulleys.
But here you go. Now that was going to be my segue. So everything we've said, like I get it. You're right. You got to have buy socks anyways, right? But I could literally have a drawer full of socks, right? So, and chain lube, I've got to do. I do it anyways. But the hot wax means you buy the Instapot or the oversized pulley wheels. Are there marginal gains things and then it's not unrelated to what I said before about buying the $12,000 bike. People, I think, are more inclined to buying the speed or buying the watts as opposed to actually putting in the work to get the watts. Are there some, right? I mean, you're shaking your head, Mike. I think that that's true, right? So are there things that you've covered on the pod that someone could, I'm unemployed. It's $18 for a pair of socks. It's still $18. It could go someplace else, right? Is there something I could do that is just about putting in the extra work on the bike that are marginal that you could see these dramatic improvements as well? So take money off the table, just get on the fucking bike and go do these things.
Yeah. Work on your position.
Okay.
Work on your position. Learn what a good position is. Learn when it's fast and know when it's not. I mean, it's pretty easy. You just go out there and assume a semi time trial position, or not the puppy paws position, but the position now that's quite popular is to, get low, get your forearms parallel to the ground with your hands kind of clasping at the hoods and get low. That doesn't cost you any money. Now you got to work at it a little bit because you might not be accustomed to it. Your cardiovascular system may not be able to pump blood to the right muscles that you're now using, but get in the right position. That's an easy one. Learn how to hold your head properly. Yeah. That's you don't have to go to a wind tunnel to do that. If you have a power meter on your bike and you don't mind exploring a little bit, the Chung method is like a poor man's wind tunnel. The Chung method was developed by Robert Chung. He's at UC Berkeley. I think he's is he a data analyst? I forget what he teaches up there, but he came up with a method using virtual elevation gain to figure out CDA. And so it's kind of a process of elimination, but you give the program, enough known factors and it will figure out what your CDA is or whether or not something is more aero than another thing. If you're doing like a back-to-back comparison between helmets or jersey or a set of wheels. It really helps if you have a power meter on the bike, although you can do it without it. You can do a roll down style, or even you can do it climbing up a steady grade. So get some knowledge on how to use the Chung method. It's more involved, it's going to take some brain power. It's not like buying pulley wheels,
Yeah.
But it's interesting because how many of us actually do have access to a wind tunnel, right? So it's interesting that you've mentioned position and so it's awesome.
Yeah.
So much of what we do is trial and error. I mean, I was listening to you had Alex Lim on there from scratch, and he's talking about how much salt you deplete, it's like, who has access to your salt depletion levels? You could, boy, I'm really salty today versus my friend here is not quite as salty. And so it is a lot of trial and error and just trying to get to that sweet spot where everything's working.
Yeah. Salt is a tough one. Sodium losses, you're going to need probably some help, some testing. I think Gatorade has a patch now. I know they do, in fact, that you can put on and it will estimate sodium losses. While it's difficult to do and maybe not always free, it can pay huge dividends though, to make sure you're getting your sodium levels right, because we're talking about blood volume there. Like how well is water? How well are you holding on to water? Where is it staying in your blood where it needs to? Right. That's a big part of
Hmm.
what sodium is helping you do. Now, all of us can figure out fluid losses with a scale. That's not hard
Hmm.
to do, right?
Yep.
Right.
Get up in the morning, naked, weigh yourself, right?
Hmm.
Go
GP.
out, weigh yourself, go out, do your ride, right? Then come back, calculate how much you drank out of your bottles, weigh yourself again, calculate how much you peed too, and
Hmm.
you do the math from there, and you can figure out how much fluid loss or how much fluid you've used on that particular day. So,
Hmm.
um, anybody can do that, and that's valuable too if you really want to try and dial that stuff in. Again, this is, it's hard to, again, it's hard to evangelize this stuff, as you guys probably know, because people ultimately with bikes, I mean, I think it's hard enough for folks who are working to get through the work week and to deal with family life and all. They just want to jump on their bike and go. Like for a lot of
Right.
folks, this is just way more than they'll ever
Yeah.
need. But
Yeah.
if you're starting to think about, if you're out on your ride and you're starting to think about, hey, I'd like to make my ride a little bit better, or I'd like to be able to keep up with the group ride a little bit, or right, or I'm fascinated by this stuff. These are some of the areas, some of the territories you can start getting into. I mean, first is, get yourself fit. I mean, that's one big thing, right? If you want to be a
Yeah.
climber, you better get on Mount Diablo and start climbing or something like that. But
Yeah.
there's other things you can start experimenting that can, I think, bring, a new level of enjoyment to your ride. Like,
Hmm.
especially if you start finding yourself, your rides are like, you're out for the same old ride with the same, starting from the same point, ending at the same point, and you're just looking to spice that thing up a little bit. You might say, hey, I'm going to try what Marginal Gains said. I'm going to snug my jersey up a little bit, or maybe put one on it's a little smaller, and see if I go out and
Yeah.
cut a little time or something changes there. I mean, you don't have to you don't have to get super mathematical with it, super data with it
Right.
to try and hack some of it either. I think there's a middle ground there too, to understanding what it is that will help you, and then putting it into practice, giving it a try and seeing that may have done something for me.
Yeah. Well, listen, I think we should probably wrap it up here. We kept you a long time, and we appreciate the time you've given us. And it's been
Can I ask you
super.
more questions?
Oh my God, Dave.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Yes.
No, you just have to pee. That's your problem. And then I
No.
want to keep talking because I for once don't have to pee, and I'm
Uh-huh.
ready to, and I'm going to miss my
Well, what about our
you've been right.
guest? Michael might have to pee. I mean, who knows?
um, I have been through most of this, so
Okay. Yeah. All right. So make
But
it
I
quick.
joked about it before, but I'm very curious. So obviously you saw them come in gravel, the flared handlebars and
uh-huh.
everything going out. Now you see it in road, right? Is this a fashion thing, or is there a real marginal gain advantage to that? And then I am curious, I joked about it before, but what difference would this uphill time trial with no tape, bar tape, what difference is that going to make? So those could be quick answers, but
Well, the bar tape, yeah, I would need Josh to answer that. That's going to be a couple watts. It's just off the top of my head, it's not going to be much. But for somebody battling for hundredths, tenths to a hundredth of a second,
Right.
that means something to them. Or if
it's
you're in a,
this.
if you're doing, maybe you're doing an Everesting challenge,
Hmm.
it could make a difference. We're talking about that number of repeats up a hill. It's going to make a difference. There's hill climb challenges where not only the aerodynamics, but the weight becomes an issue. Like hill climb folks really they start doing crazy stuff with, right? They'll run one lever or they'll do all kinds of
Yep.
crazy stuff to get
Interesting.
their bike
Okay.
weights
All
up.
right.
So yeah, so that there is something there, especially for the faster rider. It's not something you're going to suggest to the group rider, right? Or the
Yeah.
recreational rider or the club rider. That's not, put your bar tape on. That's why Silco makes great bar tape. So it can go all the way towards the stem.
Yeah. Be comfortable.
Be
That could
comfortable.
that could make you faster too over the long haul.
Absolutely. Comfort is a thing. We've talked about that. You can't, it, the risk you run, and that's always happened uh, with trying to implement marginal gains on a rider is, it can go overboard. And if you make them uncomfortable, or if they're just uncertain about it, you're not going to get what you're
Hmm.
looking for, right? And Josh has certainly found that out when he has consulted teams and riders. He can show them all the data he wants, but if they go, you know what, I'm just not comfortable with that, or I don't like that, or I just do it this way, this is the way I've always done it. I mean, you're always kind of, battling tradition and the thoughts of the athlete with what you've got before you, what the data and what the information is telling you. So,
Yeah. Well, and I like what you and Fatty were talking about nutrition going into Leadville, and he was betaing these ideas. And you don't want to be doing these things. If you're going to be racing, you're going to be riding to get yourself in shape to race. So you got all the time in the world to do your beta testing. So
yep.
you shouldn't do anything unusual on race day. I mean, that's not a good idea,
That is probably one of the strongest themes on the Leadville podcast is, figure it out early, figure it out in training, make your mistakes in training, especially with food and hydration, because that's where, Fatty lovingly calls Leadville an eating and drinking contest disguised as a bike race. I mean, that's what he calls the Leadville one. I know it's one of the greatest phrases ever, because that's really
Yeah.
what it is. If you can stay on top of your food or your nutrition and hydration, that's 90% of the battle there. Then it's just the pedaling, right? Then you just got to get yourself around the place. But
Yeah.
Leadville does take a toll. Like, it takes a hard toll on people's guts. You get there and you're just immediately thrown off. But you got
Yeah.
to be secure when you go to the line with what your plan is with eating and drinking. You want to just know for sure. It's not a smorgasbord. You don't want that out there. You're not going to a cafeteria, right? You're going to Twin Lakes Dam, where there's a feed zone. You want to make sure you get there. And I got my plan. And now things can go haywire. You can start throwing up on the side of the trail or whatever. But if you've worked on it in training and you know what your body's up for, GI wise, then that should roll over into a big day like Leadville or anywhere for that matter. And all these athletes, all these fast folks have really put a lot of attention into how they're feeling themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I did a real quick, I did a few Everestings, and training for those Everestings. I was beta. It was basically, it just became about food, because, it's your mind and your body. You could gut it out. But if you get sick, it's hard to take in energy food or whatever, gels or bars or whatever you're into for 10 hours or in the case of Leadville, best case, 6 hours, right? If you can do it in less than 6 hours, that's a big deal.
If you're less than 6 hours, you're up there with Keegan. So it's going to be, for the average rider out there, it's a 10-hour day, and most folks are 10 to 12 hours out there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I really learned a lot in that process about how to clean my palate. You get that chemically kind of taste in your, and then it's in your gut, and you're just having a hard time taking in enough because it's just so thick. And then, you find these, for me, I was using a V8. I would go slam a V8 like every few hours. And it was like loaded with sodium, and it's just the antithesis of a sweet, little treat on the bike, and it would just clean it out. And then that worked for me. It may not work for everybody, but yeah, you gotta find these things when you're on these mega endurance, multi-hour events,
Yeah. Threw up in my mouth.
They're actually good.
Doesn't sound right. Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty good. Okay. Well, listen, let's wrap it up here. Michael, it's been an education, and I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, so awesome. I appreciate all the stuff all the knowledge, and anybody out there that's considering Leadville. I mean, all the information is on the podcast. So check out, it's the Leadville 100 Mile MTB Race Podcast.
Yeah. Leadville Trail 100 Mountain Bike Podcast. I know it's a long word, but we're trying to give Google there every chance to find us. So
okay.
If you type in Google Leadville Podcast, you're going to find us.
There are some other Leadville podcasts too. Right?
There's people who've done shows about Leadville, but as far as I know, we're the only dedicated show about the Mountain Bike 100, and there's not even a run podcast that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Cole Klober was doing a show called Grit, Guts, and Determination that was kind of about the Leadville experience, but that show's gone to sleep now. So as far as I know, we're the only podcast going. Yeah. There's a YouTuber out there. I'll correct that. There is a gentleman on YouTube who is doing Leadville Generated Show. I stand corrected there. You're right. There is one other show that just started this spring. And he's doing YouTube shows right now.
Yeah, well, look for the one with Hottie and Fatty. That's easy to remember.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then also, Marginal Gains. I mean, we don't even need to talk about who that's for. The person, yeah, they know.
It speaks for itself. Yeah.
Yeah, they're out there on our
Yeah.
audience for sure. So
good.
Yeah, and that's a great source of some really esoteric information that could make you faster. It could.
The Leadville show too. Even if you're not into Leadville, if you're into endurance racing at all, especially in the off-road space, you're going to find stuff there, right? You're going to be able to find guests or topics there that are going to matter to you. So especially the nutritional stuff.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, Michael. Well, thanks so much for joining us, and thank all of you out there in podcast land for listening. And we'll catch up with you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Peace.
Thanks.